Montana Territory. Late October of 1878, the air was sharp with cold, and frost clung to the tall grass like it meant to stay till spring. The wind kicked up as Archer Vance rode down the slope toward his barn, the sky smudged with dusk. He had just finished tending to the cattle when his horse, Dusty, snorted and pulled up short. That was when Archer saw the stable door cracked open, not how he had left it. He dismounted and stepped quiet across the hard, packed earth, one hand resting on the butt of his colt. Inside the stable, the scent of hay and damp wool hung thick. His boots made no sound as he moved through the rows of stalls until he heard a cough, wet, shallow, and small. Then he saw them. A woman curled on her side in the straw, one arm wrapped tight around a child maybe 6 or 7 years old. The boy's skin looked pale under the flickering lantern light, his lips cracked, a fever burning behind his closed eyes. The woman had her back to the wall, her shawl pulled over the boy's shoulders and her own face streaked with dirt and worry. Her arms trembled, but she did not stir when Archer stepped closer. He crouched. "Miss," her eyes flew open, wild and brown and full of fear. She sat up fast, placing herself squarely between Archer and the boy. "Do not touch him." "I will not." Archer raised both hands. "You are on my land. My name is Archer Vance. You do not have to be afraid." She blinked, breathing hard, then looked down at the boy. "He is sick." "We had nowhere else to go." Archer swallowed, his voice low. "You should not be out here in this cold. Let me help." The woman hesitated, then nodded once, tight and quick. He reached down and picked up the boy, who barely stirred in his arms. The woman gathered her skirts and followed him out without a word. Inside the house, the warmth hit them like sunlight. Archer laid the boy on the settee by the fire and fetched a quilt. The woman knelt beside her son, brushing his hair back. Her hands were raw and chapped from the cold. "His name is Milo," she said quiet. Archer nodded. "And yours?" "Hattie Verran." He crouched beside her. "He will need broth and you need rest. I am fine." "You are not," he said, standing. "Let me make something." Hattie did not argue. She just pulled the quilt tighter over her son and leaned in, pressing her lips to his forehead. Archer moved through the kitchen, putting together what he had: chicken broth, bread, and a little jam. He brought it to her on a tray and set it down on the low table. "Eat," he said. "Then you can tell me who you are and why you were sleeping in my barn." She sat on the floor beside the couch, spooning broth into Milo's mouth, slow and careful. After a while, she lifted her eyes to Archer. "We came from Iowa," she said. "My husband died in the spring. Fever took him. I had no one else. My brother was supposed to meet me in Helena, but he never came. We waited. Used what little coin we had left. Then Milo fell sick. I could not let him die in the street. You walked here, some of it. Rode a wagon for part until the driver turned me out after Milo started coughing." Archer's jaw clenched. "That was 3 days ago. You have not eaten since?" She shook her head. "Just water. He needed what little I had." He looked at her differently than really looked. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her boots were thin. Her shoulders shook, not just from cold now, but from exhaustion. "You can stay here," he said, "until he is well, longer if you need." Hattie stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are a mother," he said. "And no mother should have to sleep beside her sick child in a barn." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head, refusing to let them fall. She looked down at Milo again, brushing a hand across his cheek. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not have to." He stood up. "You can sleep in the spare room. I will keep watch tonight." Hattie hesitated, then nodded. "If he wakes, I will come get you." She stood, and for the first time since he had found her, she let her shoulders relax, just a little. Archer led her down the hall, opened the door to the guest room, and handed her a nightshirt folded neat. She looked at it like it might disappear. He turned away to give her privacy, but before he left, she said quietly, "You are kind, Archer Vance." He paused in the doorway. "Get some rest, Hattie Verran." That night, Archer sat beside Milo, watching the boy breathe. Each hour that passed, the fever eased. When morning light broke through the window, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Hattie sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. Neither of them spoke. They just sat there watching Milo sleep, the air quiet and warm, and in that silence something settled between them. Not spoken, not rushed, but real and just beginning. The morning light was soft when Archer stepped outside. His boots sank into the frozen earth, and his breath trailed out before him. He went to the woodpile and split kindling, the rhythmic crack of the axe keeping time with the waking world. A pair of jays flitted through the bare cottonwoods, and the creek behind the barn ran low but steady. He glanced back toward the house once, where smoke curled from the chimney and then carried the wood in. Inside, Hattie was seated near the fire, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, a basket of mending in her lap. Threads of dark hair had slipped loose from the braid she'd woven, and her fingers moved carefully over a tear in a work shirt he hadn't touched since August. She didn't look up as he entered. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. "But idle hands don't sit well with me." He set the wood beside the hearth and crouched to feed the flames. "How's Milo?" He woke a little before dawn, asked for water, his fever's easing. She tied off a stitch and laid the shirt across the bench. "Do you have a cellar?" He turned, surprised. "I do." "Then you've likely got roots down there. I can make a soup if you'll let me, something plain if your stomach isn't set for spice." "I'd be obliged," he said, standing, "but only if you sit after." She gave a nod, small but not reluctant, and moved into the kitchen. Archer watched her go, then fetched a basin and stepped out to the well. The rope creaked as he hauled up the bucket, and the cold water splashed over the rim, numbing his fingers. He poured it into the basin and returned inside, setting it on the counter. Hattie had already peeled 2 carrots and was slicing them with deliberate care. Her hands were steadier than they'd been the night before. She didn't speak as she worked, and Archer didn't press her. When the soup began to simmer, she turned and wiped her hands on a cloth. "You live alone?" "I do." "No family nearby?" "No one left," he said, matter of fact. She leaned back against the table and folded her arms. "You were married," he met her eyes. "No, never took the step." She nodded once, then returned to the stove. After a moment, she ladled some broth into a bowl and set it on the table. "You'll need to eat if you're going out." "I wasn't planning to," he said, surprised again. "You've cattle." "A barn. That fence near the east edge looks like it's leaning. You've work." He sat, lifting the spoon. "You noticed all that on the way in?" "I noticed things," she said. He watched her as he ate, the taste of the soup simple and clean. Her shoulders had straightened since sunrise, and the color had returned to her face. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to doing for herself. After breakfast, he stepped into the front room where Milo still slept. The boy's skin had lost its gray cast, and his breathing came easier. Archer drew the quilt up around him, then turned to find Hattie in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You built this place yourself?" "Some of it." "My father raised the frame with me. I finished the rest after he passed." She stepped inside. "It's strong, well kept." "I do what I can." She looked out the window toward the line of trees Archer had planted 4 springs ago. "When my husband died, I thought I'd never feel safe again, not truly. But Milo's breathing easier and the roof doesn't leak. That's something." Archer nodded, unsure what to say. He hadn't expected her to speak of that so soon, and he didn't want to push. "I should fetch more water," she said, turning toward the door. "I'll go," he offered. She paused, then shook her head. "Let me, I need the air." He watched her step outside, the shawl drawn tight. Through the window, he saw her pause at the well, her face tilted up to the sky like she was testing its weight. He returned to the kitchen and cleaned the bowls. By the time she came back in, her cheeks were red from the cold and her eyes clearer. "Milo should eat soon," she said. "If he wakes." "He'll wake," Archer said. "You'll see." That afternoon, he repaired the gate by the east pasture. Hattie stayed inside, and when he came in near sundown, Milo was sitting upright, pale but alert, a folded quilt tucked around his middle. Archer leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You hungry, son?" Milo glanced to his mother, then gave a small nod. Hattie crouched beside him, offering a bowl of broth. "Slow," she murmured. "Just a little." The boy sipped and didn't cough. Hattie's shoulders eased just slightly when the sun fell behind the mountains. Archer lit a lamp and set it near the hearth. Hattie sat beside Milo, her sewing forgotten. Archer pulled a chair close and settled into it. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said. "Get a few things, more flour, dried apples if they've got 'em, maybe a book for Milo." Hattie looked up. "We're not trouble, Archer." "I didn't say you were," she shifted, folding her hands in her lap. "We won't stay long." He studied her in the firelight. "You're not being asked to leave." She didn't answer right away, then, quietly, "You're kind, but things change and I've learned not to count on kindness staying." "Milo's not the only one healing," he said. She turned her face toward the flames, but her voice was steady. "No, he's not." They sat there in the hush, the only sound the fire ticking down. No declarations, no promises. But something was holding between them now, as real as the quilt across the boy's knees and as certain as nightfall. Something that neither of them was ready to name, not yet. But soon, the next morning broke through a veil of low fog. Smoke curled from the chimney, slow and pale, while frost held fast to the window panes. Archer hitched the wagon under a sky the color of pewter and rubbed warmth into Dusty's ears before setting out toward town. He left quietly, trusting Hattie would manage things while he was gone. Inside the cabin, Hattie stood at the table, sleeves rolled, flattening dough with the heel of her palm. The kitchen was warmer than it had been in days. She'd found dried sage and a bit of preserved pork in the pantry and worked them into a midday meal, her movements calm, steady. Milo dozed on a pallet by the hearth, a folded towel damp under his neck to ease what fever still lingered. By the time the sun cleared the fog, Hattie had swept the floors, mended a pair of Archer's worn socks, and taken in the porch linens. She didn't move with urgency anymore. There was time now. Enough to notice the way the light angled in through the window above the sink, or how the boards in the hallway creaked only when you stepped toward the back room. When Archer returned, wagon creaking beneath sacks of flour and dried beans, the smell of bread reached him before he stepped inside. He set the goods down near the door and turned to see Hattie bent over the hearth, her face lit gold from the flames. "You've been busy," he said. "I like to keep occupied," she replied, standing. "You found apples. Traded for them. Fellow down by the mill had a surplus." She took the basket and set it on the shelf. "You ride past the Anders place? They've got a new foal," Archer said, tugging his gloves off. "Spindly thing, won't make it through winter if it doesn't gain weight." She nodded, brushing flour from her hands. "You'll help them if they ask." He sat at the table as she poured coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the stove. She set the mug before him and he took it without a word. Across the room, Milo stirred, coughing once, then falling quiet again. "He asked about you," she said. "Said he dreamed you were teaching him how to throw a rope." Archer glanced toward the hearth. "I could if he's up for it when he's better. He would like that." They sat in silence a moment, steam rising from the mug between them. Then Hattie spoke again, softer this time. "My husband never built us a house. We lived in a room behind his uncle's shop, no windows, just a cot and a basin." Archer waited. "He was a good man, just tired, always tired. I think it wore him down faster than the fever." Archer leaned back slowly. "You miss him?" "I miss the parts that made me feel less alone. The rest I've let go." He looked at her then, not just seeing her but reading the space she took in the room, the way her hands had shaped themselves into belonging without asking permission. "I was engaged once," he said. "Long time back, before the war. She married someone else while I was gone." Hattie's eyes didn't leave his. "You ever think about her?" "Not anymore, not for a long time." She turned toward the stove and began slicing apples into a tin pan. "I could bake a pie." "If that's something you'd eat." He stood and crossed to the sink, drawing up water into the basin. "Only if you let me peel." She handed him a paring knife without protest, and their hands brushed. The pause that followed wasn't awkward, just quiet. They worked side by side, the apples falling into the tin in soft thumps. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a sky scraped clear of cloud. Archer glanced out once and saw a hawk circling beyond the ridge. "No one's ever made a home for me," Hattie said, not turning. Not really. He didn't speak right away. Then, steady, you're not alone now. She looked at him and something shifted in her face, not softening, not breaking, just a loosening of the guard she'd carried from Iowa to here. That evening they ate by lamplight. Milo managed a few spoonfuls of mashed potato and half a biscuit before dozing off again. Archer carried him to the bed and laid him down without waking him. When he came back, Hattie was standing by the fire, arms folded. "I should sleep," she said, but she didn't move. He stepped closer, not touching her. "You can stay here as long as you like, not because you need to, because I want you to. I never asked for anything from you. You didn't have to." She looked up at him, her face open, unguarded for the first time. "You think there's room in this life for something new?" "I do," he said, voice low. "I think it's already begun." She didn't answer, just reached for his hand and held it, the firelight casting long shadows across the floor. And for the first time in months, her body eased, not from exhaustion but from trust. The first snow came in the night, quiet as breath. By morning, the world beyond the windows had turned pale and still. Drifts curled along the fence line and the trees stood outlined in white, limbs bare and unmoving. Archer stepped into the cold before dawn, wrapped in his oilskin coat, and fed the cattle. The snow muffled everything, even Dusty's hooves as they moved through the pasture gate. When he returned to the cabin, his coat dusted with flakes, he found Hattie at the table, sewing a patch onto one of Milo's small shirts. A kettle warmed on the stove and the fire had already been stoked. "You didn't have to start the fire," he said, pulling off his gloves. It felt wrong not to, with the house this quiet. She tied off her thread and folded the shirt into a neat square. Milo was still asleep in the back room, his breathing calm. They'd moved him to the larger bed 2 days ago, just until he was strong again. Hattie hadn't left his side the first night, but now she came out for meals, took time to mend, to read through the old almanac Archer had brought in from the barn shelf. He poured water into the basin and washed the trail dust from his face. Hattie moved to the stove, fetched 2 cups and filled them without asking. "I've been thinking," she said, setting his cup down. "Once the boy's strong enough, I could take in some work." Archer sat. "What kind?" "Sewing, mostly. Mending." "If anyone in town needs it, you'd be paid near nothing for it." "I know." She sat too, cupping her hands around the mug, "But I'd rather earn what I keep. You don't owe me anything." She didn't answer right away. Then, quieter, "I need to feel useful again." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll ask around when I ride in next." She looked up. "You do that." "I do a good deal more," he said, then took a sip from his cup. Later that day, Hattie took down the heavy quilts from the trunk in the back room and aired them on the porch rail. The snow had stopped, sun glinting off the drifts, and she stood with her hands on her hips, eyes narrowed against the light. Archer came up from the barn, hammer in hand, and joined her. "You've a good eye for weather," he said. "Sun'll melt the top crust by afternoon." "It won't last," she said. "Sky's too pale." He leaned against the post, watching her. "You ever live through a mountain winter?" "No," she said. "First time this far west, first time without a town close, too." He ran his hand along the rail. "It gets quiet, roads close. You learn to rely on what you've got." She glanced over. "You think I'm not ready?" "I think you're figuring out what ready means." She didn't reply, but she stayed beside him, her fingers brushing snow off the quilt edge. That evening, after supper, Milo sat on the rug near the hearth, drawing on the back of a freight ledger with a pencil stub. Hattie leaned over his shoulder, guiding his hand gently when his lines wavered. "You ever learn your letters proper?" Archer asked from his chair. "A little," Milo said. "Mama showed me how to write my name. I could teach you more if you'd like." The boy looked up, face open with interest. Hattie watched him a beat, then nodded. "Only if he minds you." "He will," Archer said. "He's good that way." They started the next morning, using the back of old feed sacks. Archer printed letters in crisp block strokes, and Milo traced them, tongue caught between his teeth with concentration. Hattie sat nearby, darning one of her stockings, though her eyes lifted often, watching both of them with something steadier than gratitude. That night, after the child had gone to sleep, they sat near the fire again, the room holding the warmth from the day. "You're good with him," she said quietly. Archer looked into the flames for a long moment. "I never had a son, never thought I would." She set her mending aside, hands still. "Do you wish you had?" "Sometimes." He turned to her. "But some things don't come when you think they should." "They come when they will." She held his gaze. "And if they've come late," he reached across the table, his hand covering hers, "then they're right on time." She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, lacing her fingers with his. There was no need to name anything. It was settled now. The snow outside deepened. The wind picked up. But inside, the cabin glowed with steady firelight, and the silence between them had turned from something hollow into something whole. By early December, the heavy snows settled in earnest, blanketing the valley in silence. The world outside shrank to a handful of familiar paths: the short walk from cabin to barn, the narrow trail to the creek, the stretch of fence Archer checked out of habit more than need. The rest of the land slept beneath its cover, and the rhythm of life turned inward. Inside the house, the days took on a quiet shape of their own. Milo grew stronger, his cheeks gaining color, his step surer. He spent hours sketching the world as he'd seen it: drawings of Dusty's wide eyes, of the ridge beyond the trees, of Archer holding a coiled rope mid-lesson. He used every scrap of paper Archer could spare, careful and precise with his lines. One evening, as the wind pressed against the shutters, Hattie stood at the window, watching snow pile along the sill. "You don't speak much about the war," she said. Archer sat at the table, wiping oil from the lantern's glass. "Not much reason to. Most folks don't want to hear it." "I would." He glanced at her, then set the glass aside. "I was in Tennessee most of it, carried a rifle. Watched good men turn hard in ways they never came back from." She turned from the window. "Did you?" "No," he said. "But I came close." She walked to the hearth, the hem of her skirt brushing the floorboards. "I think about what it does to a man carrying that weight. And what it takes to put it down." He met her gaze. "Take steady ground under your feet." She stepped closer. "You have that now." He stood. "I do." She reached for his hand, not tentative this time, but sure. He folded his fingers around hers, warm and solid. That night, the three of them sat near the fire while sleet tapped against the roof. Milo curled beside the hearth with a quilt over his legs, sketching without looking up. Hattie read from a small volume of poems Archer had forgotten he owned, her voice soft and even. Archer listened, one arm resting along the back of her chair, not touching but near. When the fire burned low, Hattie rose and gathered the scattered drawings into a neat stack. "We could frame one," she said. "Hang it by the door." Archer smiled. "Which one?" Milo pointed without hesitation. "That one where Dusty's looking off at the creek." Hattie laid it aside. "Then we'll keep it." The days shortened. Archer built a sled for Milo from leftover planks and scrap iron, and the boy took to it with glee, running small paths in the snow outside the barn. Hattie stitched a new scarf from wool she'd bartered for in town, gray with a single green stripe, and looped it around Archer's neck without a word the first morning he stepped out into the cold with it. On the Sunday before Christmas, Archer hitched the wagon and took them into town. The church was warm with lamplight and pine boughs, the pews filled with neighbors in thick coats and scarves. Milo sat between them, his small hand in Archer's, eyes wide at the music. Hattie sang with the others, her voice quiet but certain. Afterward, they lingered by the steps, watching as children chased one another through the slush and grown folk shared news over cups of cider. Mrs. Loring, the schoolmarm, approached with a smile. "I heard your boy might be ready for lessons come spring," she said to Hattie. "He's eager," Hattie replied, "but I'd like to keep him close a little longer." Mrs. Loring nodded. "That's your right, he seems bright." When they reached home, Archer lifted Milo down from the wagon and let him run ahead to the porch. Hattie lingered by the gate, her gloved hand resting on the post. "You've given us more than shelter," she said. "You've given me more than quiet," he answered. She looked up at him, the stars beginning to show in the clear sky. "You've never asked what I want. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She stepped close, her breath visible in the cold. "I want to stay, not just through winter, not just until I find another place. I want to stay because I've found what I was looking for and I want to build something here with you." His voice came low. "You sure?" "I've never been more." He took her hand in both of his. "Then let's build it." They married in February, a quiet gathering in the parlor with the preacher from town and a few neighbors who braved the road. Hattie wore a simple blue dress with a ribbon at the waist, and Archer had shaved close for the first time in weeks. Milo stood beside them, holding a sprig of pine like it was a banner. That night they sat together on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching the stars come out. The wind had stilled and the snow glowed faintly in the moonlight. "I never thought I'd have this," Hattie said. "Neither did I," Archer replied. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "But we do." And they did. The seasons turned. In spring, they planted rows of potatoes and beans behind the house. Archer built a coop and Hattie traded sewing for hens. Milo started school in town come April, returning each afternoon with stories of maps and arithmetic that he shared between bites of cornbread. Hattie's mending turned into commissions. Folks brought her coats and trousers, even a wedding dress come June. Archer took on a second plow horse and hired a neighbor boy to help with fencing. They slept each night with the windows open, the air filled with crickets and the scent of fresh earth. And in the quiet hours after the boy had gone to sleep, after the fire had burned low, they held hands beneath the quilts, the silence between them no longer empty but full of all they'd built together.